short, Downtown Women's Center has been in the Skid Row community and countywide for over 40 years. At our core, what we do is provide permanent supportive housing as well as a full continuum of services for women experiencing homelessness. In addition to overseeing this organization, I have the privilege of co-leading the Domestic Violence Homeless Services Coalition in partnership with Rainbow Services and many other members across Los Angeles County. We uplift survivor voices to facilitate cross-sector systems change with an emphasis on integrated, trauma-informed, permanent pathways to housing for survivors. As a coalition, we've been gathering since 2016, and we've now become the largest coalition of our kind across the nation with 800 individuals participating, representing 244 organizations, community-based organizations, government officials, philanthropic circles, and individuals with lived experience of homelessness and domestic violence. We welcome you to join the coalition. We host regular work groups on policy, on survivor leadership, on training and education. We gather for all member meetings and we host things like this today. I will drop our email in the chat, and early next year, please look forward to seeing our new website as a coalition and an easy way for you to sign up as a member in the future. Please also save March 2nd for an in-person summit. It will be our third summit as a coalition. We are going to meet in Los Angeles at the California Endowment and look forward to really addressing how we can continue to improve our cross-sector systems between predominantly victim service providers and homeless service providers. But for over a year now, we have been so thankful to partner with SCAMS as we've developed this series of trainings. If you follow the LA Homeless Services Authority demographic survey, and what you see is at least 40% of people express that they have experienced domestic violence and that live in our permanent supportive housing across Los Angeles County. So we know that it's incredibly important to build and design permanent supportive housing with survivors in mind. And we believe that if you do that, you are designing permanent supportive housing to work well for all. We've uplifted a lot of practices that can help in the design, the full holistic design, not just your architectural design, but certainly that too, in a toolkit called Creating Permanent Supportive Housing to meet the needs of survivors of domestic violence. And I will also include that in the chat when we stop talking. We hope that you will use this guide as you either operate permanent supportive housing already, or you have plans to build more permanent supportive housing. And with that, today you will hear about people's projects and how they've integrated the voice of people from the community to make sure that your architectural and built design fits the needs of who you're building the project for. And I'm just excited to hear more myself. So I'll pass it back to you, Ariana, to kick us off.
Great. And as a reminder, any materials that Amy is going to be dropping in the chat, any slides, the recording of today's session will be sent out to everyone who RSVP'd for this event. So as Amy mentioned, the topic for today, trauma-informed care and architecture design, designing with survivors in mind. So really excited about the panelists we have today. We're going to be starting off with Laura Rosbert. She is the Chief Operating Officer at Shopworks Architecture, and she's going to be providing more information about their four-phased trauma-informed care design model approach to architecture. Then we will be hearing from Rebecca Amato Spring, the Associate Director of Equitable Housing at the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking, CAST, as well as her colleague, Jimmy Lopez, who is a survivor advocate at CAST, where they're going to be talking more about a recent bathroom renovation project and the power of survivor input in that design. We're then going to hear from Marcy Fukuroda, who is the Director of Operations at Rainbow Services, to talk about their emergency shelter renovation project. And then finally, we'll hear from Becky Dennison, the Executive Director at Venice Community Housing, to discuss more about one of their recent projects that really was community-led with trauma-informed care design in mind. And so with that, I'm going to hand it to Laura to kick us off for this panelist. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'm so excited to be with you all the way from Denver, Colorado today. And so let me just share my screen super quick. I have 7 minutes to give kind of a really broad overview of the work we've been doing with this multidisciplinary team. A little background, I used to run a homeless shelter and we built supportive housing, and our guests were a big part of the design of that building. And in that, I realized that while kind of best practices in programs are kind of guest leadership, that's not something that really happens in design of buildings. Often end users aren't engaged in the process, which is quite silly. And so about 4 years ago, I joined Shopworks Architecture and have been doing this national research project with this great cast of characters you see on this screen. So, and you'll have to bear with me. I just took a home COVID test and it was positive. So hoping I don't have a coughing fit on this, but appreciate everybody's grace. So we've talked to over 1,300 folks, really prioritizing a lot of folks with lived expertise, folks on the street, folks who have lived in supportive or affordable housing, as well as frontline staff who also often aren't engaged in the design of buildings, and how it feels to an admin person in a building is really different than how it feels at 2 a.m. in a shelter, for example. We've also trained over 2,300 people in the last 2 years, which is so funny. You know, we put together some publications, which I'll share at the end here. And I think we've hit a chord, and it's really great to do great work with the folks on this panel. We have developed a framework. This is the second iteration of our framework as we really think about kind of the broad themes of what trauma-informed design requires. You know, so at the heart, we have safety. If folks don't feel safe in a space, nothing else matters, right? The thought is, how are we designing buildings that help folks heal and thrive? So starting with safety, then we have comfort, connection, and choice, which I'll give some examples of on the next couple of slides, really thinking how we're designing buildings to meet these goals. And then understanding that all of this lives in a bucket of external factors and property management and services. If you have a great building, but then property management cuts off access to amenity spaces, well, then it doesn't feel like a trauma-informed experience for staff or residents. And then the importance of know, learning, and committing. That we need to know who's going to be an end user in this building. We need to learn about their lives, and we need to commit ourselves to ensuring their voices are leading this process to ensure the building meets their needs. So what are we talking about? So when we're talking about safety, this is the lobby of a supportive housing development in Denver. This was the one that I was working in the nonprofit for, and really thinking about safety. We're thinking about sight lines. We're thinking about camera coverage. We talk a lot about kind of doors and how they're locked and how people access, and know that they can clearly exit a space and have kind of two options for that. But so often the biggest piece of safety is those open staff sight lines from staff areas into communal spaces. When we're talking about comfort, we're not just thinking about soft furniture. This is really about features that invite a person to be at ease in a space, to let their guard down, to self-soothe. We think about rocking chairs or cozy nooks. We think of elements that suggest front porches in apartments, making bigger spaces feel smaller. We're also talking about spaces that are aesthetically pleasing, that spark joy, surprise, delight. This is a laundry spa. Folks can sit on these couches while their laundry is going, which is really important for folks. Connection is key. This is about how residents to connect to each other, how end users connect to each other, how staff connect to those folks as well, and how the building residents, users, connect to the neighborhood around them. And then choice is about design elements that allow people to engage at different levels, to be directly in the mix or hang out on the periphery. Time is short and I want to get to the next section, but there's a lot of information on our website that dive much deeper into these. So we created our initial framework, and then people kept asking, you know, this is great. Like, obviously we want to design buildings that feel safe, but how do we do that? And so we came up with this 4-phase design process to really walk folks through what this looks like. So first we start off with vision setting. Who's going to be using this buildings? What are the goals of this? And then really learning about folks who are going to be in that space and think about how racial equity plays out in the space. You know, designing bathrooms. Are trans folks going to be using them? How does that impact how we're designing them, since bathrooms can be really triggering? How are we designing these spaces to really meet the needs of the folks who are going to be within it? Phase 2 is kind of the deepest part. This is where we go and we talk to people. You know, we just finished designing a shelter for a local county. We talked to 120 folks, a lot of folks on the street, staying in day shelters, folks who had recently moved into housing. And we ask them, what feels safe to you? Where are you building community? What does that look like? Also engaging with community partners, folks who are going to be, you know, stopping and hosting a meeting in this space. What are your needs? How are we making sure we're identifying what problem we're trying to solve before we go into the design of the building? Then we put lines on paper and we iterate and reiterate and reiterate until we get to good enough. No building will ever be perfect, but really also going back to the end users and saying, we were designing this community space based on your feedback. What do you think? And then 12 to 18 months after a building has opened, we go back and we do post-occupancy research and we're like, what's working and what's not and why? Then we write a report. And as we say on snarky days, we try to be less dumb with each project we're doing. How are we learning these lessons and sharing them with the world, right? The building that I was the nonprofit director on, you know, I will freely, if you want in Q&A, share all the mistakes I made on that building with the best of intentions, but this is about impact. That's what matters. So very, very briefly, Bluebird Boulder is a project. It's a supportive housing development up in Boulder, Colorado. We started our vision setting, which was amazing. We got folks in the planning department of Boulder to be there. We got staff members who are going to be there, housing authorities, landscape architects to really set the vision for this project. Then we did pre-occupancy research. I went up and spent a day with both residents at Lee Hill, which was the first supportive housing in Boulder, about what's working and what's not in their building, as well as talking to folks in their shelter who are the potential residents in this building, and then talk to staff as well. We created a report. They reflected a lot of things like the importance of nature for them, the importance of access to holistic healthcare options, the need for more amenity space than they had in the last building. And then we came up with the design and made deep shifts in the design based on that feedback. And then I went up and I talked to the residents of Lee Hill, that first supportive housing, and said, hey, we heard this and this is what we designed. What do you think? And we heard great feedback about how this building could really meet the needs of folks. And they had some minor adjustments to things, but otherwise they reflected back that they felt like their voice had been heard. And so then we'll commit to doing post-occupancy research in 12 to 18 months after opening. We just started construction. I threw a lot at you. We have so much more. We have publications on our website. Please steal them, push back, offer me better ideas. We'd love to integrate them into the work that we do. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Laura. And I'm so sorry about COVID. Please take care of yourself. Next, Rebecca and Jimmy, if you want to get your slides set up, and we'll hand it over to you. Oh, you're muted, Rebecca.
Sorry about that. We actually don't have slides. So you just got us this morning. But good morning, everyone. My name is Rebecca Malo-Sprague, and I work for the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking, or CAST. I'm the Associate Director of Equitable Housing. And at CAST, we serve survivors of human trafficking, both labor and sex survivors. We have empowerment services, which is our social services component, which included our housing program. And we also have legal services for our survivors. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about we haven't gone into the permanent supportive arena yet, but talk a little bit about how we design our shelters. And And so we recently, with the support and the economic help of a grant through the city of Los Angeles, we were able to purchase a forever home for a Hummingbird Haven emergency shelter for survivors. And when we look to that, 100% piggybacking on what Laura said, safety, safety, safety. It was a long process just to find an area that is safe for our clients. What's unique to our clients is it's not isolated to where the trafficking takes place. So we have to choose the lesser of evils, if you will, of where we can have a safe place where our clients feel comfortable walking around the area, going to the grocery store, taking public transportation, the medical facilities that are available, and also an area where we can ensure that we can maintain our confidentiality, because all our shelters are confidential. We look for open space and spacious areas. It is communal living in the shelter. So, rooms are big enough, and, kitchen areas are big enough where everyone can gather and share, cooking expertise, because we have a lot of clients that can and can't cook, and others that like to teach. We look for beautiful, peaceful backyards where clients can plant flowers or herbs that are native to them, or different flowers that really help in the healing process, where the scents are just the aromatherapy for the backyard, where they can sit, and also where we can give groups and have activities for them in the backyard spaces. And we also look to make sure that we have, ADA compliant spaces as well. The house we have is a 2-story home, so we make sure that we have a downstairs area for clients, that the kitchen area is big enough for anyone in a wheelchair that can get around. And so all of those sorts of things is what we look for in spaces. At our transitional shelter, which is Mariposa Haven, is an older home that we've had for several years and has gone through several renovations based on what our client needs are. So we have a beautiful backyard there as well. And so anytime our clients come, we ask for input on what herbs they would like to plant, what flowers. We have a big chalkboard when you come in, and we encourage them to draw or put quotes or whatever makes them feel good when they're walking in the door. We were able to get a small grant to renovate bathrooms. And we felt that was important because it is, again, communal living. And we wanted that quiet space for them to feel like an oasis where they could feel safe. They can feel good about spending some time there and taking some self-care there for themselves. And it's really beautiful to be able to see them use those spaces. And I know it's weird, like it's a bathroom, but if you think about getting ready in the morning, or just taking a hot shower, or just having that time to reflect and be with yourself, it's really amazing. And again, we think about safety, we think about maintaining our confidentiality. We talk to the survivors about what they want to see, what we could do better, how we can make it more comfortable. And I think the biggest testament to all of that is always that sticks in my mind when I first started at CAST was when a survivor came, and I had met her at our main office to talk to her about our shelter program. And when we walked into the door at our Mariposa shelter, which is our transitional, she just let out this biggest sigh of relief. And I'm like, "Are you okay?" And she was like, "This just feels like I'm home." And that was like the biggest compliment for our program that I could even imagine, because that's what we aim to do. We want our survivors to feel at home. We want them to feel good. We want them to feel safe. That's our biggest priority, is them to feel safe. So thank you. And I'll pass it on to Jimmy, that will talk a little bit about what he looked for when he was coming out of his situation. Jimmy?
Oh, well, okay. Hi, everyone. Well, my name is Jimmy, and I am survivor of labor trafficking. And well, back when I had my case, I went through all that. I had to live in a shelter for 2 years, and I had to experience different things. And then based to the topic that we're talking today, well, the shelter the my friend says is very nice. I love it. I've been there, but that was after they didn't have the shelter. And well, I live at Salvation Army for 2 years, and they were collaborating with CAST at that time, and my experience was very hard because uh, back in the days they didn't really have a lot of shelters where I was able to go, especially for guys, like at my age, and then actually bring it to the topic that the building is one of the things that I really didn't like it, because it had a lot of access to from everywhere, and they didn't have a gate, no lock, so you just walk straight into to the apartments, and you're able to go into the rooms. And then that was something very hard for me, because I was hardly coming out of my case, and I was scared for something happens or somebody comes and look for me. That was easy access for them to come and find me. And then especially if you have a roommate that comes from different backgrounds, I had to live with 3 different guys, and everyone was different, right? I know I was scared, but at the same time, I was trying to be friendly, trying to get along with those guys. But I mean, it was not easy, because uh, probably with one of us had to do something, or get into a fight, or doing a lot of things that it was not supposed to be in the building. And the supervisor, he used to come like once a day. They leave us all alone, basically, once a day, but really in the afternoon. And then that was sad, during the day, but supposedly that all of us has to be in school, right? But most of the guys, that were not in school. And then that was something that is very, very difficult, because there were not many shelters. And then there were, but like different requirements, and based on the background, and based of the way you're experiencing your life at that moment, then that's how you're gonna be able to get in, because otherwise it's hard. They have a lot of requirements, and then at that time, and it was not access for everybody. And then some of them are for adults, some of them are for young people, like youths from 16, 15 to 19 or 18. I'm sorry, after that they put into adults and all that. But that was not good, because still they were accepting adults into that shelter. And then I was minor at that time, and then I was scared. There were cars all night passing, parking right there next to the building, putting music, and it was that was not safety. That was not a safe building. And the next building, they were actually like very close to the next building, and it has access through like the air for them to jump into like a different room, to the other building. And then that was not good. That was not good, and that was my experience. And I lived there for 2 years, but I couldn't. I would have to live more than that time, but I mean, they didn't accept it, and then I had to look on my own after. Had to find an apartment to pay on my own, and then that was one of my hardest experience. Being coming out of a hard case and being able to experience that. So for me, first of all, safety was my biggest fear, that something was going to happen. And then they just have like 3 cameras, one at the very beginning, and one like in the entrance, and then one on the other side, but not around the building. And that was something that was very, very unsafe. And then they didn't have a gate at all. And then that was very sad. But I mean, I had to do my best to be safe. Yeah. And then after cast, help me out to, find an apartment and, become independent on my own. And then I had to look for actually apartment where that have a gate, and I was happy with that. And then that was really hard for me, but like, thanks God, I'm still alive. Yeah, and then that's me. That's my experience. And yeah, without Casa, I wouldn't be here too, because they provide me a lot of opportunities where I can grow my own and being able to independent myself. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jimmy and Rebecca. It's powerful to hear from a survivor the need for trauma-informed care design. As Jimmy was saying, the spaces that he was in, he didn't feel safe. And so I appreciate the two of you coming and speaking today about that. And so next up, I'm going to have Marcy join us. And Marcy, if you can share your slides, go ahead.
Yes, hi everyone. It's so good to be with you today. I just want to give you a heads up. We're having some internet issues in my building. So after I share my slides, I may have to go off video, and there's a chance I might get completely disconnected. So I hope that doesn't happen, but let me share my screen with you all. All right, and then let me just go off video just to be safe. But hello, as I said, I'm Marcy Fukuroda. I'm the Director of Operations with Rainbow Services. We are located in the harbor area of Los Angeles, and we provide shelter and support services to survivors of domestic violence and their children. And the project that I'm going to talk about is the conversion of an expansion of our emergency shelter for domestic violence survivors. And this design of this expansion and renovation is intentionally designed to create more privacy, more safety, and more support for our shelter residents. But before I dive into that, I wanted to first just talk about briefly our agency's journey towards becoming trauma-informed generally, because this emergency shelter project is really the culmination of more than 16 years of progressive improvements that have increasingly made us more trauma-informed and more responsive to the needs of the survivors that we serve. And the journey started, way back in 2006, when we first started to incorporate harm reduction principles in working with survivors. And then throughout the years, we increased our knowledge about trauma-informed care specifically, and how to create more welcoming environments for even the most vulnerable and marginalized communities of survivors. And we've invested a lot of in a lot of training for our staff and support and coaching for our staff on these issues. We moved away from having rules at our shelters towards having expectations and guidelines, and really encouraging working and supporting survivors in safety planning, and supporting them in any way that we can to be more independent while they're at shelter. We've incorporated more trauma-based curriculum and support groups in our work with survivors in general. We've gotten funding to increase our capacity to become more trauma-informed, to evaluate the impact of our trauma-informed approaches on survivors. And we've instituted regular surveys and opportunities for survivors and staff to each provide their input into our services and our approaches. So it's been years and years. And you can see that, our agency mission and our vision include key trauma-informed principles like safety, support, empowerment, collaboration, respect. Our agency vision, everyone deserves respect, love, and safety, is not just our vision. It has become a mantra, literally a mantra at our agency. You will see these words everywhere throughout our sites. You will hear our staff repeat these words on a daily basis. And then our agency values that you see here: collaboration, courage, empathy, integrity, respect, hope, and joy. These were values that were chosen by consensus by our entire staff. And we recently underwent an organizational culture audit, and it found that all of us staff members surveyed, even the ones who had started with us fairly recently, could recite a few of our agency values. And that's because, they were the ones who chose them and came up with them. So, we're very proud that, with our journey to trauma-informed care, it's not just, it has become so ingrained, in our agency that it's more than just an approach, that I think that a lot of our staff, just live and breathe it. Of course, when we first made the transition to becoming more trauma informed, the approach did not resonate for everyone. And so some people, eventually did transition out of our agency, but I feel like for the past 10 years, we've really been moving forward as a unit, and there's really very little divergence when it comes to our staff and recognizing the importance of trauma-informed practices. So, and our staff has just been great. They've been just supportive, adaptable, all of that. They are the embodiment of the principles that we are trying to incorporate. And the reason I start with this is just to point out that it's in this environment that pretty much gave rise to the renovation project that I'm going to talk about. And so the project involves our emergency shelter. And our emergency shelter for domestic violence survivors is very similar in design currently to other emergency domestic violence shelters. So it's a very dorm style environment. Each family has their own room. Prior to the pandemic, every 2 families shared a bathroom. Right now, we reduce capacity so that each family could have their own bathroom, but that every family shares a bathroom. We have a communal kitchen area, communal dining area, communal common areas throughout. And the nice thing, right, about this type of environment is that it promotes engagement with others, close support for survivors from our staff, because they have a lot of contact with our staff, and all of that is important when someone's trying to stabilize after trauma. But too much engagement can lead to things like conflict and, all the things that Jimmy talked about, just feelings of being unsafe and a lack of privacy. And of course, things like safety and privacy are also very important when someone has experienced recent significant trauma. And then, just looking at our other programs. So this is our emergency shelter that we're going to renovate. We also have a transitional housing program, which is sometimes the next step in housing for many of our survivors, especially those who are in emergency shelter. And our transitional housing program consists of independent apartment units, right? So we had to ask ourselves, why do we offer private living units in transitional housing, which some people go to just, 30, 45 days after coming to emergency? Why do we offer private living units in that situation, but not for emergency shelter residents? And isn't there something inherent about the situation of someone entering our emergency shelter that makes it just as important that they have a space of their own? They have choice about when to engage and then when to be private. And that is just important for them, if not more so, to have a feeling of physical and emotional safety and to feel like they have a space that's just their own, right? And so, our thoughts about how the model by which we provide emergency shelter has evolved. And, just because emergency shelters have historically been communal living environments doesn't mean that this shouldn't or couldn't change. But just because our thinking changed, right, doesn't mean that we could just make it happen. Because of course, with a project of this scale, it costs a lot of money, right? And we were fortunate in 2020, very, very, very fortunate to be the recipient of a $1.25 million grant from the Jeff Bezos Day One Family Fund. And this is not a grant that you apply for. This is a grant that you are selected for because someone has taken notice of the work that you're doing. So the fact that we received this grant is a testament to the great advocacy of our former executive director, Elizabeth Eastland, who I know many of you know, and of course, the great work of our entire staff in serving the community, because, it's the work that we do every day that many people in the community take note of. And so since the Day One Family Fund grant focuses on issues of shelter and housing, we decided that this would be a great opportunity to not just expand our emergency shelter, but to create a more trauma-informed living environment at the shelter. And we are among the first. I don't know that we're the first. I think there's a couple other DV agencies that are moving towards more independent private living units in emergency shelters. So we are among the first emergency domestic violence shelter agencies in LA County to provide private living units is for emergency shelter residents. And so and this is kind of what you're seeing now. This is an overview rendering of what the conversion will look like towards the end. So we wanted to add capacity. So you will see up in the of the colored rendering in the top right corner, you will see those two buildings that kind of, corner that image. Those are 4 tiny homes or 4 ADUs that we're going to add to the property so to increase our capacity. Luckily, we have quite a big lot. So each of these ADUs are 400 square feet, and there are 4 of them. So you'll see they're kind of, shotgun style housing, and then there's 2 backed up, one against the other. So those are 400 square unit. And each of these ADUs are, an individual private living unit. They're, what they have a bedroom, they have their own kitchen, bathroom, living area. They have their own washer and dryer unit, and they are ADA convertible. So they're independent living units. And then the main building, the big building that you see, so that's our existing shelter building. And what we found is that we could essentially create private living units within our existing building, without doing like really any additions to the building, but just shifting around our floor plan, right? So what you'll see, because I know it's kind of hard to tell from the actual rendering, but if you look at the top right corner, you'll see the construction plans and you'll see them kind of color blocked. So the different color blocks are basically the new little apartment units that we're going to create out of what was once, a bunch of rooms and a hallway across from some bathrooms. So now they're all going to be these independent units. And we have right now we have 10 rooms all together in our emergency shelter. Our capacity is going to decrease a little bit in that we are going to combine 2 of those rooms to create a large ADA suite. And so we'll have 9 units in the main building, and then the 4 units that have been added to the property. And so another nice thing about, and actually, let me take a step back before I go too much into some of these. I liked what Laura was saying about, just the whole going to the architects and then revisiting the plans and revisiting them. I mean, we did, to get to this point, we did do a lot of revisiting with our architects, and all of the designs and the ideas and, the things that I'll talk about, the amenities, were created with the input of our staff. We had many, many meetings with our staff to go over the plans and, to have them give their input about, what would be best for survivors, what would make the living environment, better for them, more supportive for them, more peaceful for them, more private. So a lot of this input was from our staff. And even though we didn't intentionally specifically get any survivor feedback or input into these designs, because, as I said, we have instituted so many ways that we just get survivor input through surveys and, all these exit interviews. And, we have so many ways that we get that feedback, that I believe that a lot of our staff input was based on survivor, the feedback that they've been hearing from survivors through various methods. So we do feel that this did have survivor input as well. So we have, we're creating these private units, but we are also, creating areas for engagement as well, right? Because engagement is just as important. So for example, we're actually expanding, even though most of the units will have their own kitchenette. they'll all have their own bathroom, own living room area, own bedroom. Most will have their own kitchenette. We still will have a communal kitchen, and we're actually expanding that. So there'll be 2 cooktops in that kitchen so that families can cook together, or the site can have a larger event together if they want to. There's still going to be a communal dining area, a communal living area, living room area. And then all the units will have their own private entrance, but all the entrances will center around the courtyard that you see in between all the buildings. And so even as people come and go, first of all, it's a safer way for them to come and go because they're coming from the interior as opposed to right off the streets. But also in order to come and go, they have to walk through the courtyard, and it does create opportunities still for engagement with staff or with other residents. And let's see, what else? We're also adding more staff offices so that we can place more support staff at this site so that the residents can have more immediate access to counseling, legal services, housing, placement assistance, all of the other services that we offer. We are also expanding kind of where you see these little color tables, and then right next to that, we're expanding our children's area so that we can have more children's activities, and also to accommodate our new on-site education program for our shelter families that we plan to get started next year. We're adding a computer lab so that participants can use. And one thing that you don't see here, because the landscaping looks a little blah in the rendering, but we are also gonna install a beautiful garden so that the outside is also very peaceful for them. And then let me have you look. So these are some different renderings of just the outside, and you'll see, and this is a little bit different. So on the top one, you'll kind of see the exterior of our main building, which is the white part on the right-hand side, and then you'll see the ADUs that we're going to add. The renderings are already a little bit outdated because again, we're constantly revising. So the buildings won't be that kind of depressing brown, where they're going to be a lighter, nicer color. The windows, actually, even the windows are something we thought about in terms of being trauma informed and privacy. The windows are actually going to be up higher. So, we definitely want a lot of windows and a lot of brightness, but we also want privacy. So we're placing them up a little bit higher. And then this is just a rendering of the interior of the main building, where there's shared dining room, kitchen, computer lab. And we're trying to use kind of calming furnishings, painting, decor throughout. We are also using pet-friendly materials because we do accept families with pets in our emergency shelter, and that's also part of our path to becoming trauma-informed. And these renovations, by having more private units, will actually allow us to expand that and have more families with pets. And then the last one, just a couple renderings also. The top one is actually a rendering of the inside of the ADU. And you'll see way in the back, you'll see a bathroom, and you'll see a kitchen area, you'll see a living room area, and then there's a bedroom as well. And the bottom right is a rendering of our larger ADA unit on the interior of the main building. And my apologies, I know I'm running a little bit over. Sorry, Ariana, but that's it. just to show you some renderings of what it will look like on the inside when we're all done.
Great. Thank you, Marcy. And so we're going to quickly shift gears from going from an emergency shelter to how this applies to permanent supportive housing. So I'm going to hand it over to Becky to get started.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here with you. I'm Becky Dennison. I work with Venice Community Housing. Just a little bit about VCH. We are an affordable and supportive housing developer for the last 30 plus years, actually coming up on 35 years. Relatively modest size, but we are in a period of growth with about 500 units in our pipeline. We do our housing development, supportive services, property management in-house, and we've been really working to create this integrated trauma-informed approach, strengths-based approach for the past several years. I want to say we are not experts in trauma-informed design at all. This is a work in progress for us. So I just want to share some of our experience over the past several years and kind of our learnings. But this is like was just said, it's a journey, a long-term journey, and we're not at the end of it yet. So I want to start with community engagement. So Venice Community Housing really believes that community engagement is like the core building block for trauma-informed care and trauma-informed design. And I think in the affordable housing development world, we often think about community engagement as building support for a project, educating neighbors, and we do that work. It's necessary work, but the core of our community engagement really focuses on people who have not generally been engaged. Potential and likely future residents, survivors, other folks with relevant lived experience, and really looking at it as like this deep, long-term collaborative process focused on collective decision-making, and at the core, really challenging inequitable power dynamics. And we could look at that broadly, but we also have really inequitable power dynamics in creating housing for folks who don't have it now, and then owning and operating that housing and thinking about how we create a collective experience in which people have real power and decision-making over the design of their building and the operations of their building. And I want to say that we don't view this as like a 1 or 2 time thing, right? It's not a focus group here or there. This is an ongoing effort so that we can get as many people's viewpoints, experiences, expertise into our collective thinking as we can. So this is a long-term kind of overall approach to our work. And through that, we sort of start to see where are the collective experiences, where are there real variations in experiences and positions, and then how do we create a process to kind of resolve some of those differences and make strong, informed decisions. We also, in 2018, added a community-led design approach. We were able to get a fellow through Enterprise Foundation. And, as noted, right, we've seen that design and decision-making has been over-influenced by white older homeowners, particularly for affordable and supportive housing. And that's what we saw in meetings in Venice. And so we really felt the need to create this alternative and complementary process, valuing the folks that were most impacted. And just this past year, we created a permanent position, a community design manager position, so that we could really have someone contributing that design skill, technical capacity, and focus on community engagement of directly impacted people, really focusing on who is heard and how are they heard, and how is that translated into technical design and architecture decision-making. Unfortunately, our community design manager is on a plane today, or she would be making this presentation, but I'll try to capture the work the best that I can. I also want to say I can't name all of our architecture partners, but I just want to say a broad thank you, because all of our architecture partners have been incredibly open to this methodology, and oftentimes bringing their own additional trauma-informed and community-led design tools to our table. And so we're sort of mutually learning and improving together. So some of the place that we started was that, we don't need to recreate the wheel, and none of you here need to recreate the wheel, right? So our partners at Hollywood Housing had gone through a process of incorporating trauma-informed care and design. Downtown Women's Center and partners had put out the toolkit. And so some of the stuff is we just kind of have a starting point of what we would like to include. And these are just some examples of that, right? That create transparency, safety, as folks have talked about, therapeutic elements, right? Avoiding blind corners, and really trying to find that, that fine balance between safety, security, privacy, and allowing for community space and not feeling trapped in. So sometimes we can incorporate all of these things, and oftentimes not. So it's always, again, an ongoing process. I think Laura called it sort of post-occupancy work, right? And so what we don't capture in the initial design, maybe we can capture in program implementation or creative changes down the road. So the first example of us doing this work was at Rose Apartments, which is a project in Venice, 100% supportive housing. We really went through kind of a community engagement process, tenant and staff surveys, we did design charrettes, and we also started a process around incorporating arts and community-led arts into our processes, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And you can see some of the activities we had, from like a chalk art festival to, you know, sort of more traditional engagement and involving future residents in public meetings. And this is just a little bit more detail around kind of how we engaged folks and did these design charrettes and who was engaged. And our board and staff were also deeply engaged. And our board and staff are also very representative of folks with lived experience, and particularly survivors. So that crossover is really important to us as we start to share, you know, and build this collective expertise. And some of the questions that we started asking, right, and sort of like, what would we improve about our living and workspace that we have now? You know, for sure, VCH has a lot of older buildings without adequate community space. So really like creating a collective vision around what that would look like. And then this is the biggest one, as I've said before, right? How do we have privacy and connectivity at the same time? And people's experiences with that is, you know, very different. So we have to kind of find some balance points and, you know, ways of solving problems when we don't get it right. So this is where we ended up after that. It was about an 18-month process that we went through. And you can see, you know, we've got just lots of natural light, big windows, glass doors on as many places as possible, and especially common areas and staff spaces, right? So that we've got a combination of privacy and openness. People really wanted indoor and outdoor meeting spaces, so creating some outdoor spaces in which privacy can also be incorporated. And then you'll see kind of how we tried to incorporate both that safe and secure feel and a welcoming feel at the same time. So, you know, there are security gates and all of that kind of thing, but sort of the overall viewpoint is kind of this really open, welcoming building and space, right? And we've got, you know, all private units, obviously it's permanent housing, but with this immediate access to kind of public and gathering and therapeutic spaces, and then trying to get 2 entrances and exits in as many times as possible. Again, not achieved in every space, but as many as we could possibly do. I'm going to go just a little faster because I know now I'm over time. I just want to talk a little bit about our arts project. And again, this was tenant-led with community artists and then professional artists coming together to create space in our older buildings so that people who couldn't go through a full trauma-informed design process had ways of incorporating the culture and spirit of their building and their neighborhood into our buildings. And you'll see, you know, reflections of the Venice Boardwalk and more like sort of calming and soothing pieces. You can see things that are more influenced by our younger residents. And then I'll end with thinking about how we approach new communities and how trauma-informed and community-led design is so important in that, because communities also experience trauma together. And sort of the effects of structural racism and structural violence in historically Black and Brown communities. And so in our new project in Inglewood, which is a partnership with a social justice learning institute with deep roots in the neighborhood, we are going through this community-led design process together, both to influence how affordable housing could happen in Inglewood, especially with increasing gentrification pressures, and how our project then can implement some of those tools, right? And so we've been going through about a 6 to 9 month process that is really focused on deeply engaging communities, identifying community stories, and then how that influences the design of our project. So those are just a few examples of our work. And again, thanks for being here. Good to be in the space. These are our email addresses, and Dawn Hicks is our community design manager for follow-up questions.
Excellent. And we will share all of that as well with everyone. So if I could have the panelists come back on screen, we're going to start going into our Q&A in the last bit of time we have here. So folks, if you have questions, please drop them in the Q&A box and we'll try to get through as many of them as possible. Because Becky just went, I'm going to ask you a few questions from the chat. A really great question, actually. What is a design charrette? I also don't know what that word means.
It's just a more creative term for workshop, right? It's like an interactive workshop. So you're really like engaging in the design, you're building things, you're trying to figure out, like for those of us who don't have design expertise, it's hard to see how height feels and how open space feels. So it's like a very interactive, hands-on way of experiencing how things are designed and built.
Okay, great. So this is actually a question for all the folks on this call who did community-led design and community feedback. So how do you navigate difference in opinions or conflict from two different sides of folks who want different things in their space? What takes precedent?
I'm happy to start and everybody can add on. I mean, I think so much of it is acknowledging you can never design a space that meets the needs of everybody, right? Like daylight. Daylight's really good for all of us. It helps us heal, but somebody might have an ocular condition. They might get migraines. And so for me, as we think about, doing that engagement, it's really about saying, what's the diversity of needs here? And how do we build in that flexibility, right? So with architects on projects I do community engagement on, it's like, hey, do great big windows, but only if you do blackout blinds. Do dimmable light switches. Like, I do think we need to, trauma-informed design encourages us to get to higher levels of design. I also think doing community engagement allows us to have data to go off of. One thing I find is that when I interview staff and then I interview potential residents or guests, they sometimes differ, right? Like, residents really want balconies. Staff are really traumatized because somebody once tried to jump off a balcony and they want no balconies at all ever. But I do think when I go back to staff and say, hey, I hear this, let's talk about that, right? Let's talk about your vicarious trauma and how that's choosing you to design a space in a certain way. But hey, every single person we interviewed wanted this thing. And I've been really successful because we take time to learn and write this report, to keep certain things in the design of buildings that staff initially were like, there's no way we're ever doing that. So, and for me, I always go with, if I go with guests over staff, if we can, right? The staff at the end of the day have the final say. They're our client. We have to do a dance. But let's talk about those who are most deeply impacted by our systems of oppression. Let's give them voice and choice and empowerment here. Because if not, we design the really institutional buildings we all hate from the 1950s.
I think that idea about flexibility, right? What works for one person is not going to work for everybody. So having things that can always, as many things that can be adapted as possible. But I also think it is about expectation setting, right? And so the way that you set up engagement is like from the start, we are collecting information and ideas from a lot of people, and either like that's going to inform our decisions, or this is the decision-making process, and just setting out those expectations clearly usually works pretty well for most folks.
Yeah, and I agree. It's so funny because, as I mentioned, most of our feedback to the redesigns were from staff, though, also taken just from exit interviews we've gotten from shelter residents as well. But it was truly a compromise. And, and as I said, I'm the director of operations. So I'm one of the staff that's like, well, let's do what's safe. I mean, we want it to be beautiful, but we also want it to be safe. So I appreciate Laura pushing in the other direction. But yes, we definitely went with beautiful and safe. Not necessarily, but yes, trying to, certainly be responsive, to the need for more privacy, just a beautiful, open, bright, spacious, feeling, but yes, without, like for example, with the ADUs, we first were looking at tiny homes and a lot of them are split level with the little tiny stairs and, and we're just like, well, that just seems kind of dangerous because there's going to be kids running around. So now they're just single level, so things like that. We did opt more towards safety, but, hopefully still trying to maintain a nice space.
Yeah.
I have a question for Laura and for those who works in shelters. Me personally, it's like more like a suggestion. Do you think, oh well, you guys have like somebody or is designated area where there is a like therapist person, a psychology person? Because that's, to me personally, I think that needs to have in a shelter where, let's say somebody who donates a lot, a lot of money, right? I think me personally, I will build a really nice, building where everybody is capable to live their families, with like 2 kids, 3 kids, because that's actually needed. And then here in LA, we don't have a lot of that. So far what I know and who does that is CAST. But other than that, nobody actually heard from until right now that some of us, is from Ingo or something like that. But like, that's to me based on the needs of the families. Either somebody with a family coming out of from, a really hard case, you don't know what that person is going through their lives. You don't know what the kids are going. There's a lot of like, domestic violence where, families have to put their kids between the issue and the problems. That's something it shouldn't happen. And then, if it needs help, how they can help, this organization or shelter to this person to come out of the traumatic thing that is going on in their lives. And then that's what my suggestion is, to like have somebody there in a specific place where they can, daily work on everyone's, family's case or kids' case, in a therapy where that's because I went through all that. And then at that place, they didn't have none of that. And then that's very needed because a lot of us were having a lot of issues, and we had to, like me personally, because since I was connected with CAS, they connect me with people who actually were therapists and psychologists, and I had to go with them to their offices far away on my own way, and that's something it would be helpful, I guess, to have it in the shelter.
Yeah, and thanks, Jimmy. We absolutely agree. One of the priorities of our renovation is to add 2 staff offices to our shelter building so that we could have a counselor on site. We do have a support services advocate on site for our shelter families, but also to add all, we're adding offices so we could add all our service providers. So we could have our legal department there part of the time, our housing department there part of the time, and that the service providers can cycle through and have access to the residents if they choose. So
Yeah.
And for CAST, sorry. I was gonna say for CAST, we luckily have a shelter therapist that worked with both the emergency and the transitional shelter clients. That's new. That's about 2.5 years old that we were able to get funding for that.
Yeah, and then that's another thing that once you get the help in the room or wherever you are designated to live or something like that, I wanted to make it feel like my house, my home, where I can feel good and free, like feel that freedom, because there is sometimes that they have a lot of, I know definitely safety is the first, in the building, but like there is actually places where there is actually the people, well, all of us, or not all of them, but some people, depends on where they come from, they feel too aggressive, too strong, the energy there, and then like they don't feel free. And then that's why it's more traumatizing for them. And then some of them, they come from different backgrounds, where some of them, they like to sing, where some of them, they like to paint, they like to be creative and all that. And some of them, they want to paint on their own walls. What about that? They want to feel like, oh, I'm at home, let me, not a graffiti, but like a mural, with a nice mural where they can feel the vibe, the living space where can they feel happy. That's my, I would have like, done that, and then still thinking on doing it on my room.
Yeah, one of the things you spoke about, Jimmy, is this balance between safety and freedom and what that looks like for each person. And a few of the questions that we have in the chat are about the security guards. And if you have security guards on site 24/7, what does that look like? And so I'd love to hear everyone's different experience with that.
We don't have security guards, although it's something that I keep putting on my wish list for funding to have a closed plane security person for safety. But we make sure that both our properties have security gates, and we have security cameras in all of the communal areas and especially on the outside perimeter. And then we're staffed 24/7. That's how we ensure safety. But I would love to have a security guard, especially at our ER shelter.
Yeah, and we're the same. We don't have a security guard, but our emergency shelter's 24/7. We have cameras. Yeah, and we have managers on call if there's any safety issues, but no security guards.
We also don't use security guards. And I think we have used site monitors to sort of expand staffing time, but most of our sites are permanent housing, and I feel like security guards are not appropriate in permanent housing, and that basically the way our buildings stay staffed or safe is because we have, well-trained, trauma-informed harm reduction folks on site, regularly, and we have this partnership with residents. It's not to say there's never an incident, but there's also absolutely not a need for security guards.
What it would be for me, it would be nice to have more in LA area, have more opportunity for housing for families, because I know I have a lot of experience that I get to meet families with a lot of issues, and then some of them they want to run out with the like split with their families, and then there's a need for them because they don't know where to go, and there's a lot of families that ended up on the street, and then that's how they become homeless. And to me, would it be nice to get funds for being able to open up more shelters for families, because here, well, so far, like I said, and I'm gonna say it again, so far what I know is that only does that, but probably there's more, so I'm the one who doesn't have information about it.
Yeah, definitely. Switching gears a little bit, going back to the community outreach and engagement, there's a few questions in the chat that talk about some of the time limits that grants have. Someone said that you're only given a couple weeks to do community outreach and engagement, but it seems like some of the more in-depth work takes months to do. So if you're working in this restricted timeline, what would you prioritize? What would be some of the activities you would prioritize?
Well, I think sometimes we need to push back against restricted timelines, number one. But number two, if we're thinking about this as an ongoing practice, right, we're building upon each time we do it. So like Marcy was saying, like they didn't have the staff to do deep engagement among participants, but they're building upon collective knowledge of participants, right? So, I think that you always have time to at least do a few broad community meetings, and it's not hard to engage with folks, directly impacted folks, either through a community partner or other ways, or just going out on the streets. And so I think that, I wouldn't accept too tight of a timeline on community engagement, and I would push back and say that it's important to the core of our success. But sure, things can happen in a tighter timeline, and you can always continue the engagement, once the design process has started, once you're in entitlements, once you're, once you're operating, right? So if you're thinking about this as a big, long continuum, I don't know that there's like a very specific activity that's important, but more so, how do you then stretch out your timeline throughout the life of the project to ensure that, you're continually getting the right input, guiding your decisions.
Yeah, Laura, do you have anything to add on that, having done very extensive research as well?
Yeah, I do think sometimes the funding, like the state just put out a request for funding with a 30-day turnaround for like full architectural design, which is wackadoodle. And so, I think you know, we then go and commit and we're like, hey, nonprofit, we're going to spend 2 full days with you. Identify the days of the week that work, be there in the morning to meet certain folks, in the evening to meet certain folks, and just kind of get to high level thinking. You know, we like to write these like 25 really beautiful reports where we're quoting people and really reflecting everything. But on these, we're creating like 2-page bullet point lists of make sure you're thinking about this, make sure you're thinking about this. This is the lived experience folks have experienced. How does the design respond to that? And has kind of the ultimate make it or break it. But I do think one thing that's just so cool is, right, I designed a homeless shelter with our guest advisory committee. And the first night of the shelter had this aha moment that's we work so hard for our programs to be empowering for our staff and our guests in our shelter. And here we were walking around a building and all staff and all guests at the shelter were like, I did that. That's my idea. Look at that. And so the building itself that's going to stand past all of us living is this moment of, I can impact the world around me. Like if I can do that, then I can do this other thing that I've been working on and struggling with, right? And so missing that step, then this building is not designed alongside folks, it's designed for folks, and then it's never going to meet their need. And so there's certain things you just can't cut corners on.
Yeah. Well, that's actually a great ending point since we're just about to be on time. So I wanted to thank our panelists today and for Amy for co-moderating this. It is so important to design with survivors in mind, and it was great having Jimmy with us today to provide that experiential feedback as well. So all of the slides, all of the emails, it will all be sent to everyone. There's still a lot of great questions in the chat that I hope that you can get answered and connect with the speakers on this panel. And thank you all for being here. Take care.